Part 1. Were smartphone photos always this bad? I was organizing the photos on my phone the other day.
That's unusual. Were you looking for something?
Storage space. My phone kept warning me that it was almost full.
A very practical reason.
But while I was cleaning things up, I found a bunch of old travel photos.
One of those things that never ends once you start looking.
Exactly. I was supposed to be organizing photos, but before I knew it, I was looking for pictures from Hakone.
That happens all the time.
And it got me thinking, were smartphone cameras really this bad back then?
Humans get spoiled surprisingly fast.
Modern smartphones are just too good.
That's definitely true.
But how did they improve this much?
That's exactly the point.
There are a lot of things, but the easiest one to understand is the camera.
That's true. The camera is always something I check when buying a phone.
Most people do.
One of my friends bought a new smartphone, and the first thing he sent me wasn't a benchmark score. It was a photo of his cat.
That's pretty healthy, actually.
And the message said, "Look at the fur."
Competing with fur quality instead of CPU performance.
But honestly, what people really want is beautiful photos.
And at the center of that is the image sensor.
Not the lens.
The lens gathers light, the sensor receives it.
Put simply, even if the lens is excellent, you won't get great photos if the sensor is poor.
So it's like soccer. Even if you receive a perfect pass, you won't score if the striker can't finish.
That's actually a pretty good analogy.
I'm on fire today. These days, whenever people talk about AI, it's always about the brain.
GPUs,
Generative AI, things like that.
But when you think about it, the eyes are just as important.
Actually, if you can't see, nothing can even begin.
That reminds me of the day I forgot my contact lenses.
Was it really that bad?
I couldn't read the seating chart. I couldn't read documents. I couldn't recognize people far away.
that's
A pretty hopeless situation.
And then I waved at someone in the distance, and it turned out to be a complete stranger.
You really like telling that story.
It did more emotional damage than you'd think.
but AI is the same.
People focus on intelligence, but if AI is going to operate in the real world, it has to see first.
See before thinking. Humans work that way too. That much?
They're incredibly strong.
Honestly, that feels like it should be much bigger news.
That's the fate of component manufacturers.
Everyone knows the iPhone. Everyone knows Galaxy.
But most people don't know the companies making the parts inside.
It's like knowing the baseball player, but not the company that made the glove.
That's actually a pretty good analogy.
I'm sharp today.
Maybe it's one of those rare days each year.
That extra comment wasn't necessary.
But in reality, more than 1 billion smartphones are sold worldwide every year, and image sensors are inside many of them, according to IDC.
When you hear 1 billion, the scale suddenly feels unbelievable.
That's why image sensors are both incredibly familiar and part of an enormous global market.
For example,
Think about walking outside at dusk. You can still see pretty well.
that's true.
But older smartphone cameras would often turn the whole scene into darkness.
I remember that. You'd take a photo of a beautiful night view, and somehow it ended up looking like a black rectangle.
Exactly.
Humans don't just use their eyes, they use their brains too.
So cameras start at a disadvantage.
In some ways, yes.
Have you ever traveled somewhere, looked at the scenery and thought it was amazing, then looked at the photo later and felt disappointed?
Actually, I felt exactly that while organizing my photos. At the time, I thought the view was incredible, but looking at the photo now, it feels ordinary.
That's exactly why camera companies keep pushing forward. They're constantly trying to answer one question: how do we preserve what people actually saw?
That's pretty close.
Apple, Samsung, Sony. They're all trying to achieve the same thing.
Modern smartphone night photos are incredible.
Photos that once required a tripod can now be taken handheld.
A friend sent me fireworks photos recently, and they look like they were taken by a professional photographer.
AI image processing plays a major role now too.
Sometimes I wonder,
About what?
was it really that beautiful in real life?
A lot of people think that.
Sometimes modern photos feel more like artwork than photography.
That's an interesting perspective.
Food photos are like that too.
What do you mean?
They look more delicious than the actual food.
That's not the sensor's fault. That's the interesting part today. Robots,
Autonomous vehicles, factories, drones.
all of these need AI eyes.
I keep hearing the term physical AI lately.
Exactly.
For example, before a robot can pick up a box, it first has to know where the box is.
Obvious, but important.
Autonomous driving is the same. Traffic lights, pedestrians, bicycles. Everything starts with recognition.
See before thinking. Everything connects.
In 2026, the Japanese government announced support of up to 60 billion yen for Sony's Kumamoto image sensor factory. One reason was its importance for autonomous driving and physical AI, according to Reuters in April 2026.
That sounds less like a smartphone component and more like future infrastructure.
That's exactly how the market is starting to see it.
I've been watching a lot of robot videos lately.
What kind?
Humanoid robots working in warehouses. Honestly, they seem to work harder than I do.
We're having this conversation again?
No, seriously. They don't take breaks. They don't complain. They don't show up late.
That's not a fair comparison.
But those robots still can't function unless they can see the world around them.
Exactly. The technology that takes beautiful travel photos and the technology that allows robots to understand the world. At their core, they're both built on the same image sensor.
Wow, the scale of this story suddenly got much bigger.
And at the center of that competition is Sony.
Part 2. Why did Sony become so strong? But you know, listening to all this today got me thinking.
About what?
Sony wasn't winning from the beginning, right?
Of course not.
Then, how did they end up on top?
That's actually the most interesting part of the story.
That's true. To me, Sony was always the PlayStation company.
A lot of people around the world probably think the same thing.
Actually, the first Sony product I ever bought was a game console.
Which one?
The PSP.
That definitely reveals your generation.
Back then, I thought it was just a machine for playing Monster Hunter.
Someone at Sony might cry if they heard that.
But honestly, I had no idea Sony's camera technology was among the best in the world.
Most people don't. But in professional cameras and broadcasting equipment, Sony had been strong for a very long time.
Now that you mention it, I've seen Sony cameras in TV studios before.
How to make images look beautiful. How to reproduce colors accurately. How to capture light. They've been studying those things for decades.
When I look at the AI industry these days, everyone only talks about the newest models.
That's true.
But in the end, this kind of long-term accumulation matters too.
Especially in the semiconductor industry. Of course they were. The difference is that many companies stopped along the way.
Money?
Money is one reason, time is another. And there's no guarantee you'll succeed.
That's rough. Honestly, if I spent 3 years on something without results, I'd probably give up.
The fact that you'd last 3 years is already impressive.
Was that a compliment?
No.
That's cruel.
But seriously, 10-year research projects aren't unusual in semiconductors.
When you think about it, researchers must have incredible patience.
Are you sticking with anything these days?
The gym.
How long?
3 weeks.
Too early to evaluate.
Harsh.
Research and development lasts much longer than that.
That's true.
Which is why many companies eventually withdrew. But Sony kept going.
And that became the turning point. Perfect timing?
Not exactly. It's more like the wave arrived in front of the people who had prepared for it.
Sounds like surfing.
Actually, that's pretty close. The iPhone launched in 2007. After that, the smartphone market exploded. And naturally, camera demand exploded with it.
Because everyone started taking photos.
Exactly. Travel, food, pets, children. Everything became something worth photographing.
People didn't take this many photos before, did they?
Not even close.
These days, when my ramen arrives, I take a picture before eating.
Before the first bite.
And if I forget to take a photo, I somehow feel like I lost something.
I don't understand that feeling.
I know plenty of people who do.
That's because photography has become part of everyday life. The image quality wasn't anywhere near today's level. But once smartphones arrived, the camera became a central feature.
Now people take photos while traveling, when food arrives, when they see a dog.
Dogs are understandable.
Don't make that sound like a universal law.
But photography really moved into the center of daily life. Apple, Samsung, Xiaomi, Huawei. Everyone used camera performance as a weapon.
That's true. Product launches spend forever talking about cameras.
Sometimes almost as long as they talk about AI features.
Exactly. When I watch those events, I eventually stop caring about the details and just think, so, does it take good pictures or not?
A perfect representative of the average consumer. Even in 2025, Sony remained the leader in the CMOS image sensor market.
That's kind of fascinating. Whether Apple wins, whether Samsung wins, there's still a chance Sony is inside.
Exactly.
It looks like others are fighting in public, while Sony wins behind the scenes.
But being the champion also means being chased, right?
Exactly right. And today, there are companies seriously trying to catch Sony.
Here we go.
That's what we're talking about next.
Part 3. Why has champion Sony started being chased? You know, I've been thinking about something while listening to all this.
What's that?
Sony seems like it won in the ideal way.
How so?
They spent years building up their technology, got real results, and eventually became #1 in the world. Wouldn't a company like that finally get some peace after winning?
Actually, the opposite.
I had a feeling you'd say that.
The moment you become the champion, you become the one everyone is chasing.
This suddenly sounds like a sports manga.
They're usually the first company people mention.
That company is everywhere.
What comes to mind?
Smartphones, TVs, SSDs, memory chips. I was looking into a new PC recently, and Samsung showed up there too.
They're involved in almost every part of daily life.
That's kind of scary.
In semiconductors, they're one of the strongest companies in the world. And they're making a serious push into image sensors as well.
But honestly,
What?
what kind of company even is Samsung?
That question could start an argument in Korea.
You think they're a smartphone company, then you realize they make semiconductors. You think they're a semiconductor company, then you find out they're making refrigerators.
That's a fair point.
They're basically the final boss of an RPG.
That's a pretty harsh comparison. But in reality, reports in 2025 suggested Samsung could enter Apple's image sensor supply chain, which became a major topic across the industry, according to the Financial Times in 2025.
Is that really that important?
Very important.
Apple sells close to 200 million iPhones every year. Being selected as a supplier can dramatically change both revenue and influence.
So, it's like earning a starting position at a major football club.
That's actually pretty close.
Chinese competitors have become very strong too.
Here we go.
You can see it clearly in the smartphone market. Chinese manufacturers have become much more influential.
There was a time when I only knew Apple and Samsung.
Now you've got Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, Honor, and many others.
People who aren't into smartphones probably can't keep up anymore.
In reality, many of them rank near the top of global market share, according to IDC.
The world really has changed.
Even compared to when I was a student.
Speaking of that, I've been watching a lot of Chinese smartphone reviews lately.
Why?
The specifications are ridiculous.
How so?
Everything is maxed out. Huge batteries, high-end cameras, ultra-fast charging, powerful processors. You look at it and think, wait, are they really selling this at that price?
Competition is intense.
And companies like that are starting to influence the image sensor market too.
Life isn't getting any easier for Sony. Beyond smartphones.
Exactly.
Automotive, security cameras, factories, robots. Demand for sensors is increasing across many industries.
Which makes everyone want a piece of the market.
Exactly.
When I was younger, semiconductors felt like parts that only existed inside computers.
That's not true anymore.
Now, refrigerators are smart. Vacuum cleaners are smart. Cars are smart. At this rate, my rice cooker is going to start lecturing me someday.
Given your lifestyle, that's entirely possible.
Mind your own business.
But seriously, semiconductors are now inside almost every machine around us.
Which means the sensor market is far more important than it used to be.
Of course, technology matters.
But these days, technology alone isn't enough.
Here comes the depressing part.
Building a factory can cost hundreds of billions of yen, sometimes even trillions.
I've been reading semiconductor news lately, and the numbers feel completely broken. At this point, when I see a project costing tens of billions of dollars, I think that's actually not too bad.
Your sense of scale is broken.
Completely broken.
That's how intense the investment race has become.
Higher image quality,
Higher speed, lower power consumption.
the demands keep increasing.
Users are so demanding.
You're one of them.
I can't deny that.
We're also seeing more sensor development designed specifically for AI processing.
Even cameras are entering the AI era.
More than that, they're becoming the eyes of AI itself. It is.
Winning isn't the finish line.
It's actually the beginning.
Samsung is there, Chinese competitors are there, new markets are emerging. Which means Sony has to keep running.
So it's not like graduating from a club activity and saying, we did it.
Unfortunately not.
Being an adult is tough.
That escalated into a life lesson pretty quickly.
It's funny. This conversation started with travel photos.
And somehow turned into a discussion about global competition.
The next question is the important one. What future is Sony actually aiming for? Part 4. Where is the next battlefield for image sensors? But in the end, that's what I'm really curious about.
What is?
Where does Sony grow from here?
That's exactly what the entire industry is watching right now.
I keep hearing that term lately. But honestly, it still feels a little vague.
Simply put, it's AI beginning to operate in the real world.
I see.
Humanoid robots, logistics robots, factory automation.
AI is moving beyond screens and starting to work in physical environments.
I've been watching robot videos lately, and the movements are becoming incredibly natural.
The progress over the last 2 or 3 years has been remarkable. Tesla, Figure, and Chinese companies are all pushing development at the same time.
I remember when a robot simply walking was enough to make headlines.
Now they're carrying boxes, climbing stairs, and doing real jobs.
It's kind of surreal. The future I imagined as a kid suddenly feels a lot closer.
I think that's true. But even those robots can't function unless they can see the world around them.
We're back to talking about eyes again.
That's been today's theme all along.
Very much so. In some ways, it's even more demanding. If a robot drops a box, that's a problem. If a car makes a mistake, it can cause an accident.
That's true.
That's why cars use more than cameras. They also use radar and LiDAR.
They're packed with sensors.
In some situations, modern vehicles observe their surroundings more carefully than humans do.
When you put it that way, they might actually be better drivers than some people.
That's a dangerous statement.
To be fair, I'm really bad at parking.
You suddenly revealed a weakness.
That's one task I'd happily hand over to AI.
I can understand that. And as autonomous driving becomes more common, the demand for high-performance image sensors will continue to increase.
That's true. Whenever people discuss AI, it's usually about GPUs, generative AI, or computing power.
But if AI is going to operate in the real world, it needs vision. Robots, autonomous vehicles, drones, all of them depend on the ability to see. That's why seeing will become even more important in the AI era.
And Sony is right at the center of that ability to see.
Exactly. Competition is intense. Samsung is there. Chinese competitors are there. But for now, Sony remains one of the companies leading the global image sensor industry.
Listening to today's discussion, Sony feels less like a smartphone component supplier and more like a company building infrastructure for the AI era.
That's pretty close to the core idea. The technology that makes smartphone photos look beautiful will become the eyes of robots, the eyes of autonomous vehicles, and part of the foundation of future AI society.
It's funny. We started with, smartphone cameras are amazing these days, and somehow ended up talking about the future.
But all of it is connected.
I think I finally understand a little better why Sony became the global leader, and why people continue to pay attention to the company today.
If that's the case, I'm glad to hear it.
Then let's wrap things up here.
Let's keep learning together next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for watching today's video. See you next time.